Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore and we find out about individuals from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities about their lived experiences. And this week we've got a real pleasure. I say this every week, but this week we've got a real pleasure. We've got Julia Makinde. And Julia, I know I've got the wrong title up here because I believe there's been a promotion since I started this, but Julia is a research assistant, a lecturer at Imperial College, and she specializes in infectious diseases. And you know what, it's such a privilege and a pleasure to have you this afternoon, Julia. So Julia, I'm going to kick off by welcoming you, but at the same time, asking you a question related to asking you the question related to what is it that gave you your early sense of identity, your sense of belonging when you were growing up?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for being for getting me on this program. It's a pleasure to be able to be on this side and not on the listening side. Yes. So I think my strongest influence was still, I'd say, it's from my family. So I come from a really large family.
Right.
I've got 6 sisters and 2 brothers.
Right.
And it is a fairly large family, and we are quite a very close-knit family and have remained so through the years. Mm-hmm. So my sense of identity is very strongly sort of linked to my family, I would have to say. And I think growing up as well, being a part of a traditional sort of African household, family also meant that there were lots of people always around. So when I say I have siblings, these are my immediate sort of my siblings born of the same mom, but I also have other people that I call siblings that I have grown up with through the years. And I think that is a sort of big sort of resource that I draw on regularly.
So did they help to, how can I put it? Where are you in the pecking order? Are you top, middle or bottom or in between?
I'm right in the middle, so I'm quite political that way. So when something is a plus that has to do with the older siblings, I kind of go with them and say I'm one of them. And when there's something that brings some advantage of being one of the little ones, I go with the little ones as well. So I'm still in the middle.
A good lesson of diplomacy to have learned quite young.
I know, yes, but it worked brilliantly for me, I have to say.
That's brilliant. So growing up with your siblings and growing up, you were born in Nigeria, am I right?
Yes, I was, yeah.
So what were the kind of like aspirations, the ambitions which you had for yourself or that your family had for you when you were growing up?
I think we were mostly girls, so all of the older siblings, I think the boys were set of twins who were the youngest.
Right.
And so traditionally in the society, there's a sort of leaning towards, I think growing up, there's a sort of emphasis on having a male child. Mm-hmm. And so because my family was a family of girls, there was a strong sense of, how do I put it? So my dad sort of instilled this whole thing of you can be whatever you want to be. Forget about what everybody else is saying. What do you want to do? What do you see that you want to do? And so we would have conversations around, whatever profession you wanted to be, and where you had concerns. So I initially wanted to be a medical doctor quite early. Mm-hmm. And one of my concerns at the time was I didn't actually see a lot of women. So in my local hospital growing up, most of the family doctors were male. And I often struggled with that when I was a child to say, I'm not really sure whether it means that being a doctor is not compatible with being a woman. Yeah. And I do remember that I had a conversation about this with my mom, quite young at the time, maybe in my early teens or possibly younger. And she actually took me to see a friend who was actually a medic at the time. So she practiced a bit of family medicine, and she was also a public health professional. And we sat across from her. I was quite little, and my mom was like, well, tell her what you told me. And then I explained to her, and then she goes, well, I don't really know what you're talking about because here I am. So it was nice I think we had those sort of conversations with my parents and also with my siblings as well in terms of aspiration, because we all went through the same school. So if you have 3 older siblings who, when you got into a class, the teacher kind of went, oh, I know your sister, and she was at the top of the class, for example, then you had no choice but to live up to that experience. So
I was going to ask that question in terms of how did that make you feel? Was there ever any rebellion in you to say, well, I love my sisters, but I'm not my sisters, if that makes sense. I want to be my own.
No, actually, no. It wasn't, because for me, it also meant that it was almost like, it wasn't difficult to kind of live up to it for me.
Right.
But I think we were quite fortunate that in all the systems we went through. So by secondary school, I went up to boarding school. I was the only child in my family who actually went to boarding school for various reasons. But for primary and then for university, when you went to a class where someone knew your sister, it wasn't necessarily always a bad thing.
Right. Okay.
It was always we kind of know what to expect.
Right.
But we also know you're different. So I think I was a little bit more fortunate. I never saw it negatively. It always was a good thing for me to have that.
So that familiarity, I suppose you could always go and speak to your sisters and stuff about what it was that they had experienced in the class, and it almost gave you a heads up of what was coming next. Yeah,
exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So it sounds as though that you excelled at school. You enjoyed going to school. Did you enjoy going to school, or
I had moments. I had moments. So we say. I think it depends on what level you're talking about. So I enjoyed primary very well. It was quite easy. But secondary, I had to go off to boarding school, which was quite far away from home. And that meant that I had to really decide on who I wanted to be very young. Because if you are at boarding school at the secondary level, that's where you sort of start to learn that you have to make very early decisions about how you want to spend your time.
Yeah.
Who you want to associate with, what friendships you want to build at that really early age. So I think those sort of lessons were quite fundamental to me at a very, very young age. But there were moments because I enjoyed things like sports.
Yeah.
A little bit more than I enjoyed being in the classroom. And when you're in boarding school, you had a schedule that was set up for you in some ways, and then you had some free time. And I found myself in some of those moments questioning wondering who invented sort of traditional education. I struggled with some of the routines that had to do with being in boarding school. So, yeah.
I think I'm going to dwell a little bit more there, if that's okay. So, traditional education, what was it about it that you felt? Was it that you felt it was too restrictive, or
it was very restrictive? You had to go to bed at a certain time. The lights went out. I don't know what boarding schools are now, but there was lights out, and when it was lights out, you had to be in bed at that time. And you had moments in the evening where they were called prep periods, where you had to study.
Yeah.
And you couldn't do anything else. You had to study in that time. So that was it for me. I just thought, well, I joined some of the sporting clubs because some of the prep times you had to go train in a sports facility, and it was fun to go out to school at that time to actually train. So I kind of joined those activities because it got me out of studying.
So it was an escape, but it was a welcome escape
It was a welcome escape, but I think it also developed some other skills for me and some other sort of aspects of my life. So being able to work with my colleagues, other students, and build really nice relationships. Some of my friendships now are from secondary.
Yeah. So you said originally that you had wanted to do medicine, right? And it sounds to me that you were excelling in your activities in school, both sporting and with your academics. So at that crucial point, when I suppose after you've done your initial exams, and choosing what course to do at university, what were the factors influencing you at that time, and what decision did you make and why?
I sort of felt like by the time I was doing my degree, I think it seemed to me at that point that I knew at that point that I wanted to be a doctor
Mhm,
in my head, but the idea of sort of traditional practice as a doctor didn't quite appeal to me.
mhm,
But I think I had been having more conversations with that same sort of lady that I'd spoken to about what the opportunities were,
mhm,
and also kind of being able to read a little bit more. And I knew I wanted to kind of, I knew I wanted to do research on some level to be a scientist, but I think I then had a conversation with her about you could do medicine, but you could then actually build research on top of that.
right.
Um, so I started an initial sort of degree course in zoology
Mhm,
as a layer that I would then go on to study medicine afterwards.
mhm,
By the time I was done with zoology, actually, at the end of it, I got exposed to some very focused modules
mhm,
that had to do with the research part.
mhm.
And once I'd done those, I thought, well, I'll just go into research now. And so
So what was it about, what was it about those modules which because you were still on, even though you were kind of like reticent about doing medicine, you were still on that trajectory to say that you were going to go into the medical field. So what was it about these particular modules which then kind of like said, you know what, forget medicine, this is where I really want to focus on?
I
Was it?
think they just packed a little bit more in terms of giving me an opportunity to read a bit more about these areas and to, I think, sort of reading about those and getting to see. I think those were my first sort of courses in which I had to go look at the literature a little bit more to understand certain concepts. And when I started to dig it a little deeper into the literature, I think I felt like actually I want to be doing a little bit of this sort of stuff now.
Mhm,
And I then realized that I didn't actually, I mean, after my degree course, I could just go on to do, a master's or even a PhD. So I thought, well, I'll explore it.
mhm,
I think I had a conversation with my dad then, and I said, well, I'm not really sure I want to do the medicine thing anymore. Um, but I think maybe I'd like to consider trying to see whether I could get a place to do a research
mhm,
focused degree,
mhm.
even if not a PhD, as a kind of 1 year kind of exploration. And
Yeah,
so when you finish a degree in Nigeria, you have to do a year of national service.
right.
And so I got on my year of national service, and that gave me enough time to really think about what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then so I then went on to do a master's at UCL.
So it was after you had done your degree and your national service that you then came across to the UK to do
Yeah.
your masters. How
Yep.
was that transition then for you at that stage? So you're in your early 20s, just left the military, as it were.
Well, not really the military.
Your national service, and
Yeah.
then you're coming across to the UK. Well, how was that for you? Why did you pick the UK?
Well, my sister was in Oxford at the time, so that was a big factor because she felt that she thought I might prefer the US, but actually I wasn't really keen to kind of go if I didn't want to go to a different country and then have to learn to live by myself or whatever. So I thought I'll come to the UK because my sister's here.
Mhm,
Um, and so I came in, and I think obviously you probably hear this all the time. I think the biggest shock for me was the weather. The weather was the big sort of transition for me. But there were also like little bits of the cultural kind of change for me that was shocking, shall we say? And yeah.
you can't just make a statement about shocking and then expect me to just walk on by.
Well, you want examples of the shockers I had. So on my masters, we had this towards the end of the course. So the first term, so we started in September, and obviously the term wound up in December. And we had this get together that was organized by the course organizers, and the guy said, "Well, we're going to have this get together of everyone, and would like you all to come. There'll be lots of mulled wine. There'll be lots of nice wines, and there'll be mince pies." And I had mince pies. I was like, "Whoa, yes!" And all I was seeing were the meat pies we had sort of back in Nigeria. I was thinking, oh, nice. And then I got in there and everyone was chatting and I was having a nice time. And I just bit into one of these meat pies. I was thinking, oh my God, I've got to get this out of my mouth. I don't know what this is, but it's nothing close to what I experienced. And so that was a big sort of shock for me. I think that sort of speaks to the change in sort of the food I was used to. So it was not just that, but obviously the kind of foods I was used to and everything. But I think it was nice for me because I got to experience, I mean, London is brilliant for the food you get to experience, but learning to experience food from different parts of the world was a great plus for me. But yeah, that was a big shock. Obviously, I love mince pies now. I've gotten used to them now that I know what they are. But it was something of a shock at the time.
Okay, that's interesting. That is very interesting. I can imagine. I'm just thinking about the Nigerian meat pies and thinking about it would be a big shock. Big shock. So, in terms of then being here in the UK, you've got your sister in Oxford, and then you're pursuing your career, as it were. You've done your masters. What was your next kind of like goal? What did you want to do after completing your masters, and how did you end up where you are now?
So I think the biggest sort of thing for me on this journey has been I've actually had phenomenal people at pivotal points in my career. So when I finished halfway through my master's, I'd already started applying for PhD spots, looking for opportunities. And I remember I sat across from my tutor, brilliant guy at UCL at the time. And I kind of sort of complained a little bit to him because I said there were no actual spots for international students to do their PhDs. And he said to me, he was like, you're not special, don't worry. There's no spots, that PhD spots are hard to come by generally. And so it's not just about you being international. But I think one of the things he said to me that I think it's a theme really, is that there are lots of different ways to get what you need to do done.
Right.
If you've got a goal, there's no one path to it, really. And so he said to me, I had the first degree in the same sort of area as you. I did a master's in pretty much the same area as you, interestingly. But I couldn't get a spot for a PhD. And this was several years ago. So what he said to me at the time was to explore getting a spot in an actual lab, working in an actual lab.
Right.
And then basically have a conversation about the fact that I was interested in doing a PhD. So I went on from my master's to do like about 6 months in one of those small biotech companies in Oxford. While sort of looking for a spot in a lab and a good lab. So I kind of followed exactly what he said. So I got a spot in a lab in Cardiff. And as soon as I got in, I kind of had a conversation saying I would really like to do a PhD. By the time I'd done about 6 months there, I'd actually done quite a lot in terms of the actual sort of work that needed to be done in the lab. And basically, we had a conversation about how we would make a PhD happen. And basically sort of trying to seek funding to get that done. And we got a spot and we got funding for it. And that's how I got my PhD. So I was employed as a research assistant at Cardiff University and sort of getting my PhD at the same time. So it was a bit of a win-win for me.
So it was out because other people or the group lead that you were in gave you that sage advice, really, as to there's more than one route to get to your...
So the tutor at the time at UCL basically said to me, think about it, you're trying to get a spot, but it's not the only way. So getting a fully funded, apply for so you get this ad saying there's a PhD spot. It's not the only way to do it. And he said, this is how I did mine. I basically got a spot to work in a lab and then had a conversation about whether there were opportunities in that lab or in a lab that they might know.
Yeah.
where there's funding that I
Yeah.
could then go on to do my PhD. So,
Yeah.
and I kind of just did that, and that seemed to work. I mean, that's not the only way. I think there's lots of ways to get
Yeah.
things done. But I think by and large in my career, I've found that because if you want to get something done, there are lots of ways that things can be done. And very often, I think in my progression, one of the things that I've seen is one of the things I appreciate is having people tell me about things like this. So I don't get stuck in one way and get frustrated that it's not working out.
Yeah.
Being able to explore several ways of doing it, really.
Yeah. So that's good. I like that idea of being able to keep an open mind. You have to still be open-minded in what you're doing, and not see it as being the only way to get to somewhere. So having then gone to Cardiff and worked your way and done your PhD, because now we've gone from Nigeria to England to Wales, all right? I'm just looking at your international credentials here, right? In all of those places, how did you feel in terms of your sense of belonging and identity? Was that impacted at all throughout this journey so far?
I would say yes, it was, because I mean, let's face it, I was in a completely different country. For a lot of it a lot of what I was going through, I was kind of on my own, but not quite. So as I said, my family are quite close knit. So at that time, I probably would speak to them a lot.
Yeah.
And to get through the day until I kind of had built my own friendships, I was very much in touch with my family. So we had a very good support system. I would be able to go home for the holidays and come back and continue. But that sense of belonging shifted as I started to build my own relationships, whether work relationships or relationships with my course, people on my course. So that kind of, I think one of the things, I think the person is made up of their experiences in life and the people they've met in life, really. And I think the evolution of that for me has been phenomenal. I've been able to build really good professional relationships along the way. I have had support from my family like continuously. But I've also had really good support systems from my colleagues as well throughout all of that journey through from England to Wales and then back to England again, Imperial College.
So, so what you're saying there is that the support that you've received from family and from networks which you've been able to plug into has been really useful in helping you to gain that sense of security, that sense of who you are and what you wanted to do.
Yes.
So,
but I also think that deep down you can have all the support systems, but you have to know what you want intrinsically, like in yourself. You have to know what you want. People can only kind of advise you, but ultimately you have to make the decisions about what you want to do. Because at the point when I had to go to Cardiff, when I was looking for a PhD spot, I had the opportunity to go to Cardiff for a 1-year contract to be a research assistant.
Right.
That was it. It was a 1-year contract. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to go to Norway for a 3-year PhD spot.
Right.
So it was, I mean, on the surface of it, it sounded like I should have gone to Norway at the time. But I had conversations about the two labs, and everyone I spoke to kind of said, "We think you should go with the Cardiff one." They have a history of being able to get the kind of funding in the area that you want. So maybe you ought to think about working with them, and they're quite good in that area. They're quite well known. They've been at it for a good few decades, really.
So can I just ask a little bit more? Was the PhD offer which you had in Norway, was it in a similar kind of field or a different kind of field?
So the PhD would have gone into the antibody field,
right,
for the same disease system.
Yeah.
And the Cardiff one was going to go into the T cell field in the same
Right.
disease system. So I would have been, I mean, if you are in any sort of I work in HIV, and we always have T cell and Team B cell, and they always have it sort of, I'm more important and I'm more important. So I just feel like if I'd gone with the other, I would have been on the other side of the sort of discussion. Going, yeah, no, my stuff is great, your stuff is rubbish.
Right.
when in actual fact, both people are doing great. They're both doing great things, and they should really be working together. But they sort of try to think that they're kind of competitors or something.
Okay, but because of the track record, because of advice which you received, you went for the Cardiff group. And so then tell me how that, having got your PhD, how did that then lead to you coming to Imperial College, as it were? Was there a direct connection? What was it that made you come to Imperial?
So I'd like to think that the Imperial sort of move was planned and was as strategic as everything I've told you, but it wasn't.
Right.
And because when I finished my job at Cardiff, I actually got offered a role with a team in the US.
Right.
Yes. So this kind of speaks to the theme of what we're here for, really, because I got offered a role in the US at the time. But I hesitate to share this because I wonder how people. So basically, at the time, I just gotten married.
Right.
It was a very young family, and I was kind of offered this role because I'd gone in to spend some time in the lab, and as I spent about a week or two in the lab in the US, and they offered me a role for about 2 years. I had applied for a fellowship at the same time in the UK, and I was kind of at the next stage of that, being interviewed. So the fellowship would have let me move to the US, but at the same time, the lab in the US had said, whether or not you have the fellowship, you have a job.
Right.
So it's fine.
Yeah.
So they offered me the job, and then the next day I got an offer from the lab at Imperial, which I had interviewed for as well. So in that same week, I had both offers. But then I suppose the reality of, if I'd moved to the US, I would have had to leave apart from, I just gotten married.
Yeah.
It would have meant that I had to leave for a few months by myself.
Yeah.
For the better part of a year.
Yeah.
Until we would have been able to make a full transition as a family.
Yeah.
And I kind of struggled with that a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's personal to me, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I kind of eventually made that decision that I was going to take the Imperial role. So I made that switch at that point.
Yeah.
And then moved to join the team at Imperial. So yeah, it was.
No.
I think I could have gone both ways, but I made that decision strategically because I wanted to keep the family together.
Yeah. And that does follow along with the discussion which we've had so far, because throughout you've always said that the family has always been very important to you, and having that close connection has always been very important to you. So that decision to me doesn't sound as though it's out of
doesn't sound as wild. Sound wild. Okay. Well, that's good.
Right. It doesn't sound out of character, because it does kind of like fit into what has been said before. And especially, I totally understand that just being married very recently, you are free to come and go, but if both of you can't move, then that's where problems can then become amplified. So I fully understand what you're saying.
I kind of like to have things planned out, so I know exactly what's going to happen. And I think there was a little bit of an uncertainty on how I would combine it all.
Yeah.
At that point, I just finished my PhD, and so making that jump for me, I felt there were lots of changes I was trying to push through in that moment, and I thought I'm not sure I'm quite ready for it. So I had to make that personally, that decision to kind of say, okay, I'll just stay in the UK and carry on with my postdoctoral career.
So tell me something a little bit more, because you mentioned just a few minutes ago with regards to the fact that you work in HIV. So from a professional standpoint, and coming to Imperial and working with IAVI, how has that helped you develop both professionally and personally?
Oh, I think the move to IAVI has been brilliant. And so I I think part of my motivations, I remember having an informal chat with the then scientific director at the Human Immunology Lab about the role before I decided to apply. And just wanting to know if it's for me, because they wanted someone who had a background in T-cell immunology, which I was at the time. But one of the things that was a huge plus for me was, in addition to being operating in that sort of global space for developing vaccine solutions, whether to HIV or other infectious diseases, as an organization, there's a sort of huge push for sort of global development. And it's not just a one-sided thing, it's like the partnership that kind of supports that sort of development. And I think that's the element that it makes the whole package kind of really great. And so it's giving me a lot of room to grow, not just within the research space, but also in sort of global development. So working with international partners towards a common goal in these disease areas. So I think that sort of growth for me kind of takes it just a step further beyond sort of your traditional research. And that for me is a plus.
So effectively, when you were looking at becoming a doctor all those years ago, where you were, I suppose the appeal of being a doctor is being able to help people to an extent. And then here you are now, these years later, working on a disease, but you're working on it both from an international, but also from a globe, not international, you're working it from a national, but international global inputs. Everybody's voice is definitely being heard around the table. Yeah.
Yes, I think there's a sense of that, being able to build strategic partnerships with people from different countries who are working on the same thing, and being able to meet with them, being able to discuss projects with them, and actually move things forward and actually make hopefully really great discoveries that will translate into, I don't know, vaccines or drugs. And I think that for me is a huge plus, and it's been a huge sort of personal growth area for me as well.
What would you say has been the most enjoyable aspect of your job in what you do, and how? What's the most enjoyable aspect of it?
I quite like the bit of being able to brainstorm when there's a particular sort of scientific question that we need to address, being able to sit around the table and really think about how we can apply new technology. So I think I'm kind of at a really nice time in science where the technology the technology to do some of the things that we do is like on steroids right now. There's just so much you can do. I think the technology is moving faster than we can actually keep up with. So for me, it's being able to sit down and think, what can we do to address this question? I really like that bit. I also enjoy being able to have a student come into our lab, for example, and actually watch how they transform from that person who doesn't know what they're doing to the person who then tells me, actually, you're wrong. and to know that I'm actually wrong, and they're right. So I really enjoyed that. I had a moment this week where I sat down to plan 2 projects with my PhD, the person who worked with me on his PhD. And I was trying to plan these 2 projects with him, and we came into the meeting and actually he'd already done it. And I was thinking, oh my God, like, this is it, like he could actually do more than I can in certain areas. And I think that's it. I think some of that really brings, I think there's a personal satisfaction from knowing that I can not only contribute to the science, but I actually am contributing to expanding the scientists that we have, the crop of scientists that we have, and encouraging people to do really good things as well in the realm in which we operate at the moment. So I think I enjoy that very much.
So it's not just about your own personal development, it's also about the development of students who are coming through. And so the wisdom which was passed on to you, you're now
Yeah.
imparting it onto someone else.
Yeah. I remember my PhD student, my PhD supervisor in Cardiff used to say to me, like, what I would expect is that in a few years, you're going to be me.
Yeah.
And I would consider my career a success if I had about 20 people who were exactly very similar to me in the way they would approach times and in what they would achieve in their own time.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you think about it, you know, I am a scientist. I'm doing some really interesting things, and I've been able to contribute to kind of raising the next set of scientists in some way, and I think that's really nice to see the growth. Really.
I'm going to ask this final question. I'm going to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions which they would like to ask as well. But I'm going to ask this other question, which is slightly different in terms of the fact where being a woman in science and being a Black woman in science, how have you found your sense of belonging, your sense of identity?
I remember when I first started at Imperial in my first year, I went through one of these training sessions where they talked about how to become a lecturer. And it was being run by this lovely lady, and we sat in the room, there were about a dozen of us. And she said to everyone, you know, it's very difficult to it's a very difficult path. It can be challenging. There's lots to think about. But I have to say, and I'm really sorry for some of you in the room, it might be a little bit harder because obviously the system is it's not what it should be. Mm-hmm. And she pointed at me going, you, for example, you know, there are several things that, you know, will probably not necessarily work in your favor all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think you need to be very strategic. I just started at Imperial at the time. Mm-hmm. And I found it very interesting. I hear these sort of things a lot. Mm-hmm. And I know that I think there are sort of systemic issues as a whole that we need to think of. With respect to, I like to kind of concentrate more generally on how I feel about what's going on.
Yeah.
As a woman, as a Black woman. Mm-hmm. And I try to focus on what I believe to be true in terms of my work and the quality of my work, and I focus on that a bit more. Mm-hmm. And try not to think about everything else that's going on around me. So mm-hmm. That's usually the way I try to work, because mm-hmm. Otherwise, I think generally they're not. I never see a lot of people like me in the spaces in which I go within Imperial. I mean, luckily within the IRB space, because of the very nature of how global it is, it's a completely different story.
I was going to ask that question if it was because you spoke about the international and the global nature of IRV. I did think to myself, well, I know within Imperial it might be quite isolating, but within IRV, I would have thought it may.
It's different. It's completely different. So there is a sense that I'm not alone. There is critical mass in that respect within the IRB space, but not necessarily within the Imperial space. But I work in both. So
so that's helped. That probably has helped to buoy you up, because you're not overly exposed to one without having the support of the other. So it's a natural support mechanism for you. Yeah. Okay. I'm just wondering if there's any questions from the audience. If anyone has a question that they would like to ask, I can carry on asking questions. I don't see anyone's hands at this time, but we'll carry on then. So I'm just thinking, I think I've been following your career for a while, really. And you have been you've won a number of awards for things which you have done, right? Can you just explain how that's made you feel in terms of some of the things which you've been able to have achieved within this scientific space?
I'm not sure if I call them awards, but opportunities to do things that are different to what I actually do at the moment. I think that's it. I think it's for me, some of those experiences, say being able to work with people in parliament when the opportunity has come about, or being able to work with other scientists in different sort of capacities. I think for me it's expanded the scope of what I understand to be the impact of what of how much impact my work can actually translate to. So that's how I feel about it, because I think in terms of policy, I always used to think for a while that policy was very far removed from what I do. Really, that's for other people to take care of. It's not within my immediate sort of area of expertise or influence. But being able to take part in some of these things and to work with individuals who are not necessarily scientists, for me has been great, because it's giving me that whole other area that I can actually see the work translating to. So being able to be asked specifically about scientific evidence that relates to a particular question or a particular policy that was being considered, or things like that. I think it makes you think that the work is worthwhile then. I mean, what we're doing, I would hope would translate to actual solutions globally, but also if it can actually influence how policy is shaped, then that's also surely a good thing.
Yeah. So being at that table to be able to have a voice to help to influence future decisions and directions, and making a real contribution in that sense. I think that's excellent. I'm going to ask my final question then, and that's what advice would you have given to your younger self, your 16-year-old self, as to what they could expect?
I don't know about what they would expect, but it was more about the mindset.
Okay.
I think when you're young, there's lots of possibilities facing you, and sometimes it can be daunting to make decisions about what you're going to do and about the next step. Especially if you think about all the changes, either moving countries and stuff for me as a young person. What I would say is that it's okay to make the decision, whatever decision you make. It's okay. And it'll all end up working out fine. Because sometimes not making a decision is worse than, making a decision. You have to make a decision. I think if someone had told me then, it'll be fine, then I'll be a little bit calmer as I try to decide what to do at each stage. So yeah.
So make the decision. It's okay to make that decision. Yeah, it will work out.
It'll work out eventually.
Yeah. And okay. I like that. I do like that.
Because I remember when I made the decision to come to Imperial.
Yeah.
I'd flown back from the US, so I didn't give an answer. I'd flown back, and I had to go in the lab to do something in Cardiff. And I remember actually walking home from the Heath Hospital in Cardiff, and I had to go on a long walk, like before I made the phone call to say I'm actually going to go with Imperial College. And I struggled before I made that call, but actually was okay. It was fine to make that decision, I think.
It was okay. It was the right decision for you.
Yes.
And it's kind of like being able to accept that a decision has to be made. And once I've made that decision, let's move on with my decisions. No regrets.
No regrets. Just make a decision. It's okay to make a decision. And, things will work out.
Yeah. Whichever way. Julia, it's been really wonderful having you on and hearing your stories. No mince pies. Well, mince pies are okay now.
Mince pies are perfectly fine. I love them.
Right, but it's been really, really great having you on, and you are the final one before Christmas, and so I want to just say another big thank you. So what I'm going to do is just share what's going to be happening after Christmas with everyone, and just another big thank you for what you've done today.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Julia. So after the new year, we're having a break until the 14th of January 2022, where we'll have Dr. Rasha Alalami, and she's a consultant cardiologist here at Imperial College, and she'll be sharing her story with us. In addition, if you haven't seen some of the other episodes of Belonging, please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/IAO /belonging-IAO. So please go and have a look at those as well. But until we see each other in 2022, have a good break, enjoy the festivities, and stay safe. So thanks very much. Thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.